Hello friends, and welcome to day 16 of Arthurian April. Today we are at last talking about Morgan le Fay. Now, if you think it is difficult to trace the narrative of some of the characters that I've talked about already, nobody has it on Morgan le Fay. Nobody is as complex, nobody is as confusing, nobody is as overwhelming as trying to track this woman. So she first shows up in extant writing in the Vita Merlini, which is one of Geoffrey of Monmouth's 12th century compositions about Arthurian legend, not as famous as his histories of the King of Britain. However, we're pretty sure she existed before. There's quite a bit of evidence that shows that when other people were writing about Morgan later, even in around this time, almost seems to be an assumption that people would know who she is. Her name also comes from the meaning of sort of like a sea goddess, which totally makes sense given that she's associated with taking Arthur over the water to Avalon. The initial spelling of her name is Morgen. That is the oldest version that we have written down. That is the Welsh approach to it, as well as Breton. Later, it gets changed to Morgan, and then other different versions with other letters and combinations. Now, I will talk more about Morgan's sisters, but for now, all you need to know is generally she is accepted to be the daughter of Igraine, who eventually marries Uther under extreme duress and has Arthur, and Gorlois, the Duke of Cornwall. She's heavily associated with Merlin. In many of the earlier tales, she studies under him. She is an incredibly capable, intelligent, talented woman. In fact, I include this section from the Vita Merlini in the beginning of Queen of Mercy, which is all about Morgan, and it is just so amazing. I'm going to read it to you right now. She who is first among them is more skilled in the healing art and also surpasses her sisters in beauty. Morgan is her name, and she has learned what useful properties all the herbs contain so that she can cure the body ills. She knows, too, the art by which to change her shape and to fly through the air like Daedalus on strange wings. I mean, how absolutely gorgeous is that? I use quite a few little things here in the story, and if you read the story, you'll see what I took. Stuff sort of starts to change as the tales go to France, and we start to see this opposing relationship between Morgan and Guinevere, which is interesting on a number of levels, but let's just say this persists, and it's one of the catalysts into really shifting her away from an incredibly skilled, learned, benevolent character into a sorceress seductress. Of course, none of this is freaking surprising because, of course, we're going to demonize the woman that has all the kinds of power and smarts and strength. So by the time we get to the Vulgate and post-Vulgate, we start to see the change in her character. By the time we get to Mallory, she is completely an evil bitch. She is conniving, she is manipulative, she is still absolutely seductive and gorgeous and intelligent, but also not a good person. In the Vulgate's Suite du Merlin, the narrator is describing her, and he goes on and on about how beautiful she is, and then adds, she was the most lustful woman in all Great Britain and the lewdest. And as long as she was in her right mind, she was more courteous than any, but when she was angry with anyone, there was no need to try to reconcile them. So not only is she absolutely lusty and sleeping with all the people she's not supposed to sleep and using her sensuality and sexuality as a weapon, but when she gets angry, there's nothing that you can do to make her not angry. She also appears in Sir Gawain and the Grey Knight, and we discover through that story that she's actually been manipulating the whole entire situation with the Green Knight, and essentially it's all her fault, even though Gawain is her nephew. There are all kinds of antics of things that she gets up to with various lovers to try and punish Guinevere, to try to oust her as an adulterer. One time she does it and accidentally they out Isolde instead, so really fun. She's also associated a bit with the character of Modron. I chose to have Modron as a different character in my story, but Modron is often affiliated with Broceliande, which is one of the main forests in King Arthur stories where all kinds of cool things happen, and also as the mother of Sir Yvain. But sometimes Morgan is the mother of Sir Yvain, so, take your pick. I particularly love the story where she actually heals Sir Yvain of his madness, because one of the things that he deals with in the stories is often kind of having his own little psychotic break, and she's able to help him, which I think is very beautiful. In quite a few examples of stories, She tries her darndest to seduce Lancelot, and she pursues him no matter the cost, and he ends up just, it's clearly very annoyed at the situation. One person that she tries to seduce at one point basically says he would rather opt for castration than to fall to her wiles. Morgan is also often surrounded by other powerful women, which I found really, really cool. All the way from the beginning of the story, she has this sort of group of 9 women that all have very interesting powers. And even as she becomes less and less of a good person and more of a sort of antagonist, there are still other really powerful sorceresses around her. We even find Morgan in other stories outside the Arthurian genre, including in Carolingian retellings and even some Greek and Roman stories. Now, if you're saying, wasn't there another character with a similar name? There are lots of characters with similar names. But one most similar would be her sister Morgause, who we think could have been a situation of translation, kind of like Gareth and Gaheris, but could also have come from another tradition. We just don't know. There's so many characters that get absorbed into that Arthurian amoeba that I've talked about that it's really hard to tell one from another. It just kind of depends. This only gets more confusing in that Morgause it really kind of stems more from the character of the Queen of Orkney, who was very early in Geoffrey of Monmouth described as Anna Pendragon, Arthur's full-blooded sister, but then that gets absorbed. She becomes Morgause, she becomes a couple of other names as well, and it all gets very confusing. This back and forth of whether or not Morgan is good or bad continues. There's a wonderful table at the end of the Wikipedia entry for her that goes through all of the most recent films and portrayals of Morgan, and it literally goes back and forth, ping-ponging between evil and good, and sometimes other. And this is an exceptionally long list. There is no character that I have researched in all of King Arthur's stories that has showed up this many times in books and films and in movies, absolutely all over the place. She also shows up in a lot of comic books and graphic novels because she really does have this otherworldly, all-knowing, goddess-like approach. And indeed, in Mallory, I believe, she starts to be referred to as Morgan the Goddess because she becomes so incredibly powerful. Now, in the 80s, there was a definite resurgence. There is an author who's very famous for writing about Morgan, but I do not get into talking about that person because that person was a horrible, horrible individual. And I will not tell you where to look for that because you need every kind of trigger warning that you can imagine. But just rest assured, yes, that book influenced me. Yes, it was important to me when I read it at the time. But no, I do not ever want to promote that work. That said, when it came time for me to write Queen of Mercy, which features Morgan as the main character and the point of view character, I wanted to take a little different tact. First of all, I wanted to have Morgan be older. If you look at my books, they are roughly maiden, mother, crone, different order, but with lots of interesting commentary on either one. So she is my crone. She is in her 60s. She is past her prime of youth, I guess. She has a grown daughter, but she's also dealing with the aftermath of things that happened to Merlin that I won't give away. But instead of taking the approach of every other thing that I've ever read about her, where she has incredible, unlimited, amazing power, in this version, Morgan, that I spell with an E because that's the original version, she loses her magic. And she's got to figure out what to do while some very nasty things are happening at court and with magic itself that she has helped to build among her cadre of amazing, strong, powerful women. Anyway, if you have a favorite depiction of Morgan le Fay in any of the work that you've read or seen or written, do tell me. I'd love to hear.